Matt, you had tweeted out quite the tease to our various Twitter followers for yourself and I. Lincoln Riley and Steve Spurrier, you have in your 12-part series on the Riley Files have drawn some comparisons between the two head coaches.
Absolutely. And when you think about it, I mean, so Keegan Renault, pointed that out on the Riley Files. And I thought, hey, like that comparison works. It works on several levels. And one thing that's kind of underneath the surface here that we're going to, bring up now here on the Voice of College Football is that those are different dudes, right? They're different kinds of cats. They think differently from the crowd, from the conventional wisdom. We remember, among many other things, that Steve Spurrier prided himself on working smarter, not harder. Like that is like the Spurrier brand. I'm going to go out to the golf course and get my 18 in. I'm not going to let football dominate my life. I'm just going to be really good when I'm actually coaching football. And that would get under the skin, of football lifers. And of course, we saw that in the NFL. And of course, we know the NFL didn't work out well for Spurrier, but like he ribbed Jim Haslett of the New Orleans Saints with that particular comment. But it's been a theme throughout his career that I'm going to be the smartest guy on the field. I know more than you do. And I'm going to outwit you. I'm going to outflank you. And so in Lincoln Riley, I mean, he's not as brash, of course, as Spurrier is. He's not the jokester that Spurrier is and was. So that's not a comparison. But in terms of thinking creatively and doing things differently from the rest of the competition and priding himself on being different, like you see that. And one of the underlying themes of the Riley Files, and in terms of comparing Lincoln Riley to Brent Venables at Oklahoma, Brent Venables is an old school coach. He's much more cut from that traditional cloth. And that's another reason that the Oklahoma boosters and donors have really embraced him, because he's part of that old time religion, pass rush, defense, physicality. Not that Lincoln Riley didn't, desire physicality, but it's just not front and center with him. With Lincoln Riley, it's more about the mastermind, the chalkboard genius. And that's a very clear connection to Steve Spurrier. Now, what makes this even spicier, before I let you come in with a few follow-ups, Mark, is that, Steve Spurrier Jr. was on the staff at Oklahoma. And of course, Bob Stoops, hired Lincoln Riley, but was the understudy to Spurrier. He worked for Spurrier on the 1996 Florida Gators as Spurrier's defensive coordinator. So you have Bob Stoops positioned right in the middle of these two men in terms of eras. Elevated his stature at Florida under Spurrier, but then welcomed in Lincoln Riley and also had Steve Spurrier Jr. on staff. Really fascinating to explore just what Bob Stoops thinks about Steve Spurrier and Lincoln Riley. Get him in a room or have him over for dinner. What would Bob Stoops say in terms about the connections between Steve Spurrier and Lincoln Riley? That's really fascinating. That would be a great thing to explore. But, just in general, at the Riley Files, at Trojans Wire, that whole notion of Lincoln Riley and Steve Spurrier having a lot in common, I think it sticks. It's a comparison which really works.
I'm going to take us back in era, because when you framed up how those guys view themselves and their approach to the game and outflanking, outwitting the opposition in a much different way, but still the difference in personalities between Spurrier and Riley, I will take it to another degree with a guy that I'm a huge fan of, named my son after him, Tom Landry. So if you see the NFL documentary on Tom Landry, the NFL Network, whatever they phrase those, A Football Life, yes, they're tremendous. And and I just didn't get it from this, but a number of other sources, where Tom Landry basically, with all his humility as a man of faith and other things, as a football coach, he thought, I run this thing and I know more than anybody else. And basically, he did come up with just some great innovations. Like he created the 4-3 defense, and he created, he's the guy that basically figured out the rules are not prohibiting us from going in motion before a play or shifting. And so he invented all that business. But he basically,
shotgun.
the shotgun. Oh yeah, nobody was running a shotgun in the mid '80s, and it was like, or the mid '70s even, and it was like for years and years and years, because he just figured it gives the quarterback an extra beat and a half to look downfield because he's got the ball in his hands. Uh, but it was just funny because they depict it in various sources, and I go to this NFL documentary where basically he had the thought that as long as these players don't, trip over themselves, I've devised a scheme and a system that they can't screw up. They better not fumble or do anything too stupid because I'm smarter than the other guy. They're just pawns.
They were cogs in the machine, and of course that's like a big underlying part of the Tom Landry story is that players didn't really warm to him at first because they saw he was like the cold computer, just spitting inputs into a system, and the player was just like a cog, and you had to work really hard, or you had to really get deep into Tom Landry's mind and heart as a person in order to see the person behind the facade, behind the fedora, behind the steely glare. And so yes, he did view players as cogs to a certain degree. I mean, obviously, you've seen, how he related to Hollywood Henderson and how he grew to, appreciate these players off the field. But certainly just within the narrow confines of the business of running a football team, yeah, like he thought his system was it. And it really is staggering to note that, he was the defensive coordinator for the New York Giants, and Vince Lombardi was on the offensive side of the ball, the greatest collection of two assistant coaches ever on one team. But so he was, an extremely successful defensive coordinator in the late 50s in New York. And then he revolutionizes NFL offense in the late 1960s. And then in the 1970s, that's when the shotgun really took off with Roger Staubach and the Cowboys. So like his imprint on the game of football is extraordinary. And just to draw the comparison to Spurrier, which then enables us to take a jump to Lincoln Riley, the most important game in Spurrier's career. What happened in that game? We're talking about the 1997 Sugar Bowl against Florida State. Spurrier did not like the shotgun. It was kind of like his own Nick Saban moment. Is this what we want football to be? Nick Saban, bristling at the way football was evolving, but Saban was willing to adjust. Like he didn't like it, but he was willing to adjust and do what it took to win. So Spurrier had that moment in the 1997 Sugar Bowl. He went to the shotgun. He didn't do that much in the late regular season game from 1996 against the Seminoles when Raynaud Wilson and Peter Boulware were crushing Danny Werfel from each side. Spurrier conceded the point. He went to the shotgun in the Sugar Bowl, had Danny Werfel taking those snaps, and the Florida offense hung 52 on the Seminoles. So Spurrier was willing to swallow. It was a moment, it was a display of humility from a person who really didn't have very much of it. And so like that draws a connection to Tom Landry and the shotgun, and it invites a new conversation of, how Lincoln Riley adapts at USC to the personnel that he has. It's a fascinating, multi-generational, multi-era exploration of college football. And you really can't get three more different personalities than Landry the stoic, Spurrier, who would joke against Tennessee and Florida State until the ends of the earth, and then Lincoln Riley, this mysterious guy who is fiery, but yet in a somewhat contradictory way, close to the vest. Three very, very different flavors, but all, revolutionary offensive thinkers in the sport of football.